72 hours before one of the most sensitive American military operations in a generation was set to execute, an FBI financial crimes analyst was running a routine ownership trace on a holding company registered in Liechtenstein. The flag had been generated automatically. It was one of dozens in the queue that week. Protocol allowed stopping at 2 steps. The analyst ran 4. Step 4 connected the Liechtenstein company through a Beirut real estate firm to a Treasury Department assessment of Iranian financial facilitation networks. The Beirut firm connected to a Delaware LLC. The Delaware LLC had one disclosed beneficial owner. That owner's name returned a hit in a federal employee database. The name belonged to a serving Special Operations Field Commander with top-secret SCI access. He was assigned to the execution cell of a classified military operation whose launch window opened in 72 hours. He had received $780,000 in payments from a network connected to Iranian intelligence over 14 months. And the investigation that would follow, designated Hollow Sword, would establish that he had already transmitted the operation's strike coordinates and timing windows to the adversary the operation was designed to strike. Before we dive in, comment where you are watching from and click subscribe. The story of what the commander did, how he was caught, and what his transmission cost is also the story of what counterintelligence actually looks like when it functions correctly, which is rarely dramatic and almost never fast enough, and in this case was exactly fast enough by a margin of hours. Understanding the full weight of what happened requires understanding what the commander was, what he knew, and what he had access to over a career that the American public will never be given a complete accounting of. He had spent 19 years in the operational spaces that military organizations maintain between what they acknowledge and what they actually do. 11 combat deployments across 3 theaters, decorations classified at the time of their award and still classified. A career built through a succession of assignments of increasing sensitivity, each one predicated on the demonstrated trustworthiness of the last. By the time he reached the position he held when the investigation opened, he was the field commander responsible for final execution authority on a major classified operation. He knew the strike coordinates. He knew the timing windows. He knew the asset positioning, the ingress routes, the abort criteria, and the contingency protocols for every scenario the planners had modeled. His knowledge of the operational framework was effectively complete. He had transmitted most of it to Iranian intelligence. The FBI's National Security Financial Crimes Unit conducts routine financial intelligence sweeps as part of a standing counterintelligence program. The sweeps generate dozens of flags monthly, most of which resolve into legitimate explanations after minimal investigation. The flag that opened Hollow Sword was generated by a transaction pattern involving the Liechtenstein holding company. 7 inbound transfers over 14 months from a source entity that traced through a 4-step ownership chain to a commercial real estate firm in Beirut. 2 of the firm's principal shareholders appeared in a 2021 classified Treasury assessment of Iranian financial facilitation networks. The Liechtenstein company had made 9 outbound transfers during the same period, all to a single Delaware LLC with 1 disclosed beneficial owner. The analyst who ran all 4 steps did so on a flag that most analysts working a full queue would have closed at step 2. 4-step ownership traces require coordination with international financial intelligence partners, consume significant time, and statistically resolve into legitimate explanations at high rates. This one did not. The beneficial owner of the Delaware LLC was a serving military officer. The flag that would have been closed without consequence at step 2 became, at step 4, the opening event of a counterintelligence investigation that would reshape a classified military operation in the final hours before its execution. The financial crimes analyst flagged the connection at 11:47 in the morning on a Tuesday. The flag reached the counterintelligence division chief by early afternoon. The director was called at 1400 hours. By 1600, a full investigation had been opened with access restricted to 9 people. The Director of National Intelligence was notified by secure channel at 1830. Epic Fury's execution window opened in 78 hours. The first 24 hours of Hollow Sword established the financial connection with high confidence and defined the critical unknown. The flow from the Iranian connected network through the Liechtenstein company to the Delaware LLC to the commander's brokerage account was documented across 14 months and 9 transfers totaling $780,000. The financial case was strong. What the investigation had not yet established was the operational dimension. Had the commander transmitted classified material? If so, how much? And had Iran acted on it? That question carried a deadline. If the coordinates and timing windows for Epic Fury's primary strike package were already in Iranian hands, and Iranian defensive systems were repositioning in response, the operation could not proceed on its original parameters regardless of what the investigation ultimately proved. NSA technical assets were redirected within 4 hours of the investigation's opening to monitor signals associated with the commander's known devices, his operational environment, and the communication infrastructure of the Iranian intelligence entities connected to the Liechtenstein network. The monitoring was authorized under an emergency FISA provision, permitting abbreviated review when the threat involved imminent harm to national security operations. The answer came in 14 hours. On the morning of Day 2, Iranian signals activity monitored through a separate compartmented NSA program showed a significant volume increase in encrypted traffic between the IRGC Intelligence Directorate and its regional operational commands. The traffic was not fully decryptable, but its volume, its timing, and its distribution pattern were consistent with the dissemination of high-value intelligence product to operational units. The timing corresponded to a 22-minute window of encrypted communication activity on the commander's personal device, a device he used for personal rather than classified communication, showing activity on an encrypted platform the NSA team identified as modified with an obfuscation layer, consistent with IRGC, External Operations Communication Security Tools. 22 minutes. High-volume Iranian signals dissemination. The task force's assessment delivered to the director at 7 o'clock on Day 2 was unambiguous. Iran had received something from the commander within the previous 24 hours. The question was no longer whether to arrest. It was how to do it without triggering evidence destruction or operational disruption to the execution cell that was 56 hours from launch. Arresting a special operations field commander inside a classified operational staging facility presented specific problems with no straightforward solution. The commander had operational authority over personnel who were unaware of the investigation. He had access to facility communication systems and security infrastructure that a civilian subject would not. Any indication of approaching law enforcement through those systems would give him options for evidence destruction and evasion that could not be permitted at this stage of the investigation. And the execution cell of Epic Fury would lose its field commander 48 hours before launch with no prepared replacement in position. The task force solved the problem through military counterintelligence channels. The Army's Counterintelligence Division read into Hollow Sword under emergency compartmentation protocols, coordinated with the commander's immediate superior in the operational chain, an officer whose integrity had been assessed as uncompromised, to arrange a recall to a command facility under the cover of an urgent operational planning requirement. The cover story was specific enough to be credible and generic enough that nothing in it could indicate what was actually waiting. The commander left the staging facility at 11:30 in the morning, believing he was going to a command briefing. He arrived at the command facility at 12:15. The FBI agents and Army counterintelligence officers were in a conference room he was directed to by a duty officer who knew only the cover story. The commander entered the room. He saw the agents. He saw the badges and the sealed federal warrant on the table. He sat down. He did not speak. He did not ask questions. He did not appear surprised. He sat down the way a person sits who has known for some time that a room like this existed somewhere in his future, and who has decided in advance to meet it with stillness rather than reaction. He was informed of the charges and his rights. He invoked counsel without a word. He was in federal custody within 90 minutes. His personal devices were seized at the command facility. His quarters at the staging facility were secured by Army counterintelligence personnel within 20 minutes of the arrest. before any information could reach facility personnel through informal communication channels. Forensic analysis of the personal device confirmed what the signal's intelligence had indicated. The 22-minute encrypted communication event had transmitted a compressed data file. The file was partially encrypted at a secondary layer that resisted immediate full decryption. Recovered fragments contained structured information consistent with operational parameters, coordinate formats, time notations, and asset identifier codes whose structure matched the classification schema used in Epic Fury's operational documentation. Iran had the coordinates. Iran had the timing windows. The decision about whether Epic Fury could proceed at all was made at the National Security Council level within 6 hours of the arrest. The operational analysis was direct. The primary strike package coordinates and timing data were in Iranian hands. Iranian defensive assets could be repositioned or activated in response. Proceeding on original parameters meant executing against an adversary who knew where the strikes were coming and when. The original parameters could not be used. The question was whether the underlying strategic objectives could still be achieved through modified parameters built in the time that remained. The Joint Staff Assessment presented to the NSC in a 4-hour emergency briefing was yes, with modifications, at higher operational risk, with reduced effectiveness against specific target categories. Not the operation. Epic Fury had been designed to be across 19 months of planning and preparation. A degraded version of it, rebuilt in 48 hours, with modified coordinates, modified timing windows, and a strike package that accounted for the probability that Iranian defenses had already responded to the transmitted intelligence. The execution window opened on schedule. The modified operation proceeded. What happened during execution is classified. What is acknowledged is that the operation occurred, that its results fell short of the original assessment in specific categories that remain classified, and that it exceeded the original assessment in others. Whether Epic Fury ultimately achieved its strategic objectives accounting for the compromise is an ongoing classified assessment that will not be publicly resolved. The commander's transmission did not stop the operation. It changed it. The full cost of that change belongs to the classified record. The damage assessment for Hollow Sword required 12 weeks and the participation of 6 intelligence and military counterintelligence agencies. The commander's access over 19 years of increasing seniority extended well beyond Epic Fury. His knowledge of operational frameworks, source networks, and force capability assessments across the Special Operations Enterprise represented a damage surface considerably larger than a single operation's coordinates and timing windows. The assessment's most troubling findings concern the period before Epic Fury. The Liechtenstein financial trail covered 14 months. Evidence in the assessment suggested the relationship with the Iranian financial facilitation network had begun earlier. How much earlier could not be definitively established from the financial evidence alone. The commander's cooperation in post-arrest interviews was characterized by the assessment team as selective. He confirmed the financial relationship. He confirmed the most recent transmission. He declined to discuss the full history of the relationship or the complete scope of what he had transmitted over time. The selective cooperation was itself a form of discipline. He was providing enough to avoid the most severe additional charges while withholding enough to limit the government's ability to fully reconstruct the damage. He was managing his legal exposure with the same calculated precision he had applied to operational problems for 2 decades. The assessment's conclusion on long-term damage was expressed as a range rather than a specific figure. Both ends of that range are classified. Federal charges were filed within 28 days of the arrest. Espionage under 18 U.S.C. Section 794. Conspiracy to commit espionage. Aiding the enemy under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Bribery of a public official. The aiding the enemy charge was the most significant element of the charging document. It reflected the government's assessment that transmitting operational coordinates and timing windows to an adversary in the final 72 hours before a military operations execution window constituted more than intelligence compromise. It constituted direct assistance to a force engaged against American military personnel and interests. Under the UCMJ, that charge carries a maximum sentence of death. The commander was held at a military detention facility pending proceedings. His attorneys challenged the concurrent application of military and civilian charges in separate jurisdictions. The motion was under review. He had not provided additional cooperation beyond his initial selective disclosures. The numbers that define this case do not require interpretation. They speak with the flat precision of a formal damage assessment summary. 19 years. The commander's career in American Special Operations before the arrest. 11 combat deployments across 3 theaters. $780,000 in payments received through the Liechtenstein financial infrastructure over 14 months. 14 months, the documented duration of the financial relationship, assessed with high confidence as longer. 22 minutes the duration of the transmission event on the commander's personal device. 9 transfers from the Liechtenstein company to the Delaware LLC. 4 steps in the ownership trace the analyst ran on a routine sweep flag. 72 hours between the opening of the investigation and Epic Fury's execution window. 1 analyst. 1 flag in a queue of dozens. 1 additional step in an ownership trace that protocol did not require and that most analysts working a full queue would not have taken. That step, the 4th step, produced the Treasury assessment connection. The Treasury assessment produced the military officer identification. The military officer identification produced Hollow Sword. Hollow Sword produced the arrest 56 hours before the execution window opened. The arrest produced 48 hours of modified planning that gave Epic Fury a chance to proceed in some form against a prepared adversary rather than execute in original form against an adversary that knew precisely where every strike was coming from and precisely when. It was not enough to prevent all the damage. The coordinates had already been transmitted. The timing windows were in Iranian hands. The operation that Epic Fury was designed to be across 19 months of meticulous preparation could not be fully recovered in 48 hours. But it was not abandoned. It was not canceled. People who understood exactly what had been lost worked with what remained, rebuilt what could be rebuilt in the time available, and executed. The operation occurred. That outcome depended entirely on the investigation opening when it did, on the arrest happening before the execution window rather than after, on the modified planning those 48 hours made possible. All of it depended on 4 steps in an ownership trace on a Tuesday morning by an analyst who did not need to run the 4th step, who had every procedural justification to close the flag at step 2, and who ran it anyway. That step was enough.